Newstead.
Here.
Commissioner Durkin.
Here.
Mayor Tully.
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 3 on our agenda, which pertains to the approval of council meeting minutes, and we have 2 sets of minutes to approve tonight. Our minutes from the executive session for approval only of March 3rd, 2015, and also our council minutes from our regular council meeting on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 2015. Are there any changes, comments, corrections to any of those minutes from any members of the village council? Seeing that there are none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. Thank you. It brings us to item 4, which is reserved for proclamations. I have one proclamation to read tonight, and it is with request to conservation. Whereas, in that the environment is an integral part of our community, the Village of Downers Grove does hereby pledge to consider the effects to the environment and all decisions that are made. We want to work with citizens and business owners to implement systems in the village that will protect and improve our land and water resources. Whereas the Conservation Foundation received a grant from the DuPage Foundation to implement the Conservation in Our Community program, and the village was selected as a community to participate because of their efforts to promote sustainable practices. And whereas the purpose of the Conservation in Our Community program is to encourage residents in the village to adopt environmentally friendly practices as they relate to rivers and the land and promote public-private partnerships. And whereas the mayor and commissioners of the Village of Downers Grove and the Conservation Foundation agree to work together to address these issues and implement programs to assist the residents of Downers Grove, now, therefore, be it proclaimed that all residents of the Village of Downers Grove are encouraged to make a difference in the quality of water in the area, reduce stormwater runoff, and are further urged to support and participate in the Conservation in Our Community program for the year 2015. Thank you. That brings us to item 5, which is reserved for council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to share goings-on in the community with members of the audience and those watching at home, or any other items of public interest. Good evening, Commissioner Jose.
Good evening, Mayor. I have no report.
Thank you. Commissioner Rankin.
No report, thank you.
Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I actually have a report out that I'd like to do. Back in March, we had, the village had taken advantage of the interest rates in the bond market. We were able to refinance an existing bond with a savings of over $400,000 to the Village of Downers Grove. Just this past week, actually last week, this week just started, I apologize. Just last week, the village again took advantage of the bond rating, the bond market, and we were able to save on a refinancing of an existing bond $657,000. So what does that mean? That means that the village has saved over $1 million in actual monies. And the reason we were able to do that is twofold. One, because of the financial strength of our community, our village, and more importantly, the AAA bond rating. And I just want to point that out. I know we sit up here and we constantly talk about our bond rating, talk about our financial position. It's extremely important to me that we continue that message. And for those that think this is a campaign speech, it is not. It's 7:04, the polls are closed. It's called reality. It's the hard work that this council has done and continues to do, and I just want to report that out, Mayor, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate you sharing that with everyone. That is
Thank you.
terrific news for everyone throughout our community. Commissioner Newstead.
Thank you. Just quick congratulations to Nan Newland, who is the new chair of the Illinois Municipal League's Public Works Committee. She's in this week's Illinois Municipal Review magazine that we get. I'm sure she will represent our village very well in that role and use all her experiences to benefit not only the state, but represent Downers Grove in a high regard. Thank you, Nan.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Olson.
No report.
Commissioner Barnett.
No report, Mayor.
Thank you. That brings us to item 6. Well, I have no report as well. I'll have something later on under the mayor's report, item 9. That brings us to item 6, our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the public with respect to any of the items on tonight's consent agenda? Seeing that there are none, any questions or comments from members of the village council with respect to any of the items on tonight's consent agenda? Commissioner Durkin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out the item that's on here regarding the funding request from the Economic Development Corporation and Tourism for the Village of Downers Grove. It's been almost 4 years since Michael Cass has joined us as the president and CEO of our Economic Development Corporation, and I am happy to see that they actually, through their request, are not requesting the additional funds that we've given to them in years past under the hotel motel tax. This shows me and shows the community that their campaign for prosperity has really taken off. It's taken them to a new level, and it's starting to show the partnership that we have is really one that is working extremely well, and something that I know going down the road we will continue to see. So I know that the mayor and I have sat on this committee, and it's as the liaisons, and it's beneficial. But more importantly, it's great to see the results, the financial results that are being presented tonight. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or comments with respect to any of the items on tonight's consent agenda? Seeing that there are none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to item 7, our active agenda. We have no items on our active agenda tonight. So we will go right to item 8, which is our first reading or our workshop agenda. This is an opportunity for items to be presented for initial discussion only. No action will be taken at this time. Custom dictates that we usually turn the meeting over to Village Manager David Fieldman or his designees to present these matters for our initial consideration. We have 2 items under tonight's first reading or workshop agenda, items 8A and B. With that, Mr. Fieldman, good evening.
Our first designee is our manager of the planning division, Stan Popovich, here to present an item establishing special service area number 8. Stan.
Good evening, Mr. Popovich.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you, Mr. Fieldman. As Mr. Fieldman noted, we're proposing an ordinance to establish the special service area number 8 for Nelson Meadows subdivision. And we've done multiple SSAs, but this one's from Nelson Meadows. As you know, Nelson Meadows is a little southwest of downtown, generally at Jefferson, at the intersections of Jefferson and Brookbank, which is highlighted here and showing the different lots that have been subdivided there. The SSA allows the village to levy a special tax on the property owners within the HOA, which is the Nelson Meadow HOA, if they do not maintain the stormwater detention basin, which is shown here in the light blue color, and then the associated piping, inlet, outlet structures, anything associated with stormwater, associated landscaping in the basin, retaining walls, etc. Should they not maintain those, then the village has an opportunity to levy the tax to provide us with monies to maintain those items there. This is the last step, the ordinance approving the actual SSA. In November of 2014, the Village Council approved an ordinance proposing the SSA. Then we had a waiting period of about 60 days till February of 15, where you held a public hearing, and we've had a 60-day comment period. We've received no comments on the proposed SSA, so now we're able to propose the ordinance establishing the SSA. That's the gist of the item tonight. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you at this time.
Terrific. Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from the audience at this time with respect to this item, creation of the SSA for Nelson Meadows? Yes, we have one. Good evening.
Good evening. Laurel Bowen, 829 Clyde Drive. My first question is, you had a public hearing, but the properties haven't been sold there yet, so how can any homeowners for that area respond if they're not there yet? The public hearing is for whom?
Well, the notice was
The
given
residents?
for the distance requirements that we have in our ordinance, so it would be anybody living within that proximity of their, whether they're in the future development or not. Obviously, if they're not there yet, we can't give them notice.
The SSA only applies to Nelson Meadows, correct?
Yes.
So if you have a public hearing, the owners of those properties are not there yet, so they can't respond.
Right, well, they're not owners of the property yet.
That's correct.
Right, so we don't give notice to people who don't own the property.
So you establish an SSA before you have homeowners there?
The current owner of the property.
Yes.
received-
Well, they're going to sell it off.
Right.
Currently, as of right now, there's only one current owner of the received opinions.
My next issue is with this SSA for the retention pond maintenance. I guess you know where I'm going with this. I don't believe you have that for Bradley Brookbank development, which also has a retention area. Can that be established there now?
I'd have to look into that and let you know, obviously.
Well, I would appreciate that because we have a stormwater issue and there's a big problem there with the maintenance of the retention area, who's responsible and who's not doing it.
Right. You'll recall that this approach to dealing with detention areas and making sure there's funding to deal with maintenance issues is a practice that we developed and implemented about
I think that's a good idea, that's why I'm up here.
4 years ago. Right.
Thank you.
And the other one goes back much further than that, unfortunately.
I appreciate you getting back to me on that.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Other questions and comments from the audience on the proposed SSA for Nelson Meadows? Questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Commissioner Newstack.
Sorry, I didn't ask this one in advance. How often do we inspect and/or check these detention areas? I know we have a few that are already kind of up and going with properties that are occupied nearby. Is it an annual or quarterly, or how do we know if they're not maintaining the basins appropriately?
When the basins are originally constructed, there's a 3-year maintenance and monitoring program established, so we should, on an annual basis, receive a report from an engineering consultant noting that the basins are growing the correct vegetation, if not, what the remedies are, that the developer would then be required to come back. I believe it's the village's goal to go out and look at these basins at least once a year to just make sure that they look like they're functioning properly. A lot of times we learn about issues when people call and say, hey, something's not working.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Hearing none, thank you. Next item, please.
Thank you. The next item is an ordinance amending the FY14 fiscal year budget. Here to present this ordinance is our Finance Director, Judy Butney.
Good evening, Ms. Butney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. There is good news for the general fund. The expenses were within budgeted levels, and the revenues performed better than budget, adding a little over $1 million to fund balance due to income from operations. Because of this, we are able to make the transfers that we discussed this summer during long-range planning. $1.9 million to the Transportation Fund to eliminate the accumulated deficit, and $1.9 million to the Risk Fund to address the negative cash balance. These transfers require a budget amendment. We also have good news items in 4 other funds. The Motor Fuel Tax Fund received an additional distribution of $200,000 from the state of Illinois in 2014 for the Capital Bill Program. This additional revenue was used to purchase salt for the village in 2014. A budget amendment is required for this item. Revenues from sales taxes were greater than budgeted, and as a result, the sales tax rebate fund required a budget amendment of about $100,000. As Commissioner Durkin explained a few minutes ago, in 2014, the village refunded bonds that resulted in savings to the village in debt service payments. The transaction requires a budget amendment of $7 million to reflect the accounting entry that is required to show the proceeds from the new money coming into the fund, which is a revenue item, and paying off the old higher interest rate bonds coming out of the fund, or the expense side of the entry. And the library received a donation of $200,000 from the Friends of the Library, which is used for the library renovation. This also requires a budget amendment. Then the Risk Fund, as was discussed during this summer's long-range planning. This fund requires a budget amendment of $470,000 for greater than expected claims activity. As you know, the village self-insures for a substantial amount of the workers' compensation and property risk. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll flip it for this one and ask first if there are any questions from members of the Village Council, since some of this we discussed previously, but just in case, with respect to the new information, are there any questions? Hearing none, any questions from members of the audience? These are all good items. One thing I want to ask is, and I may not have this perfectly right, but with respect to the gasoline tax issues, that's one that we levy locally. Is that the one we levy locally? Is that the one that we get a portion of from the state?
That's the one we get a portion from the state.
Okay. Is that the one that was subject to the temporary sweep in 2015 to plug the
Yes.
state's budget problem?
Yes.
Yes.
So I only want to point that out because this is not something that we can probably expect in the future.
No.
This good news.
No.
This is a one-time deal.
No.
We had a couple of years of good news with more money than expected. I think we're going to follow up with a couple of years of less than expected. So we'll continue to monitor that and report that out as we learn more.
Right. Obviously, something we need to be very careful of moving forward is anything that passes through the state is subject to these sweeps, which is a very polite word for, well, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And that ends our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. That brings us to item 9, the mayor's report. And speaking of the state, I have two things I want to mention. Number one, on Monday, in my capacity as the president of DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference, which is a conference of governments that represents 33 municipalities throughout DuPage County and a total of about 1 million residents, Governor Bruce Rauner came to a meeting of the executive committee of DMMC. There were mayors and managers in attendance representing approximately, I would say, half of the membership of DMMC. People who were on the current board. He came out with some of his government liaison folks to basically speak very frankly with us about some of the issues that we've identified here on this dais with respect to threats to our municipal revenues. And the main one that we've discussed, and which has received a lot of attention, is of course a suggested reduction of 50% of our share of the local state income tax, which is also known as the Local Government Distributed Fund, or LGDF. And in that conversation, obviously, every single mayor and manager in the room, Manager Fieldman and I were both in attendance, every single mayor and manager in that room has advocated and has said very loudly that we do not want our share of that income tax revenue depleted, because as we've mentioned in Downers Grove, a 50% reduction in an annual year would amount to about $2.4 million, and that would have some impact upon our organization, considering that those funds are used for a number of things, including public safety and delivery of other essential services. So we obviously have communicated also to the governor that we don't want to just be like many other organizations saying, don't touch ours, go touch somebody else's. We really want to sit down with him and work with solutions. And not just the governor, but also the General Assembly, because the governor can't do it by himself. The General Assembly has to cooperate with the governor and vice versa. What kind of solutions can municipalities put forward that would help us enhance our own circumstances such that we become less reliant upon the state for things like this, the share of state income tax? Some of the things that the governor said would be, he was first of all, very appreciative we were talking about solutions and not just hands off my stash, so that we may not have to touch LGGF in 2016 or beyond if some other reforms can take place. All these reforms are going to be very controversial and difficult, and different people have different opinions, but some of the ones that align very well with municipal legislative agendas, including conferences of government like DMMC and the West Suburban Alliance and Northwest Municipal Conference, Illinois Municipal League, Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, et cetera, are things such as eliminating unfunded mandates. There are about 200, I've lost track, over 200 unfunded mandates. These are requirements that the state imposes upon municipalities but provides no funding for us to do them with. We're not going to try to ask for all 200 unfunded mandates to go away, but to exercise our strength was his unity of voice, coming up with a list of about 6 legislative initiatives that would have the most impact on municipalities generally, and that are the type that all municipalities would get behind because they're just of that nature. And get those to the governor's office and suggest these are the ones we'd like to see some reforms on, because they would help us out in many ways. Number 2 would be a topic that is very near and dear to Downers Grove, which is reducing or eliminating barriers to consolidation. We have been at the leading edge of partnerships and opportunities for doing less with more through consolidation or elimination of unnecessary units of government, such as the Fairview Fire Protection District that we've worked on with the county on. The governor was very interested in that. He has a task force with the lieutenant governor on both unfunded mandates and consolidation. And so rather than just talking about that generally, we're going to try to put together collectively ideas for changes that can be made legislatively that would allow us to do more things like that in an innovative way. And the third one had to do with ideas for enhancing local control. That is, a municipality governing its own destiny, taxpayers having more say in how their communities are run on issues that right now you have to go through Springfield on. But imagine if you could have a direct say through your representatives here on how those things were done. Again, that's a very generic, general statement. The idea is to come up with some specifics. So it was a good conversation. And I think it is true that we all need to work together to try to help resolve the state's economic woes, because their problems reflect poorly on us. And after all, municipalities are creatures of the state. We simply deliver services in ways that are more intimate and more efficient than if the state tried to do it itself. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. There will be more specifics coming out of that conversation. Those are in progress, so perhaps even next week we might have something more concrete to talk about. And the only other thing I want to mention in my report is, as I mentioned at the top of the meeting tonight, of course, is election night. I'm sure everybody here has voted, and I hope you did. And I just want to extend my gratitude to all candidates for public office, because it is a tough road to hoe to serve in public office, and it's even tougher to run for public office. So I commend everyone for doing so, and extend my good luck and best wishes to all candidates for all offices locally. And that ends my report. That brings us to item 10, which is the manager's report. Mr. Fieldman.
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 11, our village attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 items to present this evening. The first is an ordinance establishing special service area number 8 in the village of Downers Grove, and the second is an ordinance amending ordinance number 5346 in the village of Downers Grove budget for fiscal year 2014. Both of these items will be on next week's active agenda. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. That brings us to item 12, which is, as was mentioned earlier, the segment of the meeting will be reserved for public comments of a general nature. If any members of the audience have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to items not on tonight's agenda, now would be the time to please come forward to the podium and please share with us what's on your mind. Any questions or comments of a general nature at this time? Hearing none, I'll move right to item 14 and ask for a motion to adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping new business. You'd think I was anxious to end the meeting or something.
Or set a record.
Or maybe just 13 is unlucky, I don't know. Take your pick. Item 13, council member new business. Do any members of the village council have any items of new business they would like to raise with their colleagues at this time? All right, hearing none, we'll now go to item 14. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Newstead?
Aye.
Commissioner Durkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner Rankin? Aye. Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you and good night.